All right. Good morning and welcome to Coordinating Efforts, Grassroots and PAC. I'm Susanna Cagle with CQ Roll Call, our Manager of Advocacy and Engagement, and I'm joined today by Lauren DePuter from the American Pharmacists Association and Joshua Habursky from the Grassroots Professional Network. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Susanna. I am the Senior Manager of our Political Action Committee, and I also handle our grassroots advocacy. We have about 62,000 pharmacist members that I handle that for.
Fantastic, and I think most of our listeners know Josh, who has joined us several times to just kind of walk through his various experiences working in grassroots across numerous agencies. So we're excited to have you both on today. Looking at the next slide, why don't we just talk a little bit about today's agenda. So Josh is going to cover for us at a high level kind of regulatory grassroots and advocating before executive agencies a little bit today. So we are going to look at a case study with a former client, or I'm sorry, with a current client, USA Catholic Charities, and we're going to talk a little bit about tips and tools for managing those campaigns. But before we hand it over to Josh, Lauren, why don't you kick us off with kind of your experiences at the American Pharmacists Association?
Sure. So handling both, I know some associations separate their PAC department and their grassroots department, but in my last position, this position, I've handled both, which is a blessing and a curse because I personally think that the PAC and grassroots have the same goal, is to engage your members in the political and legislative process. So when you combine the two, it's not only great for your goals for your association, but it also makes your job easier. So the way that I do it is I really try to push on the educational aspect of it. When you educate your members on the importance of grassroots, you can also make sure that you educate them at the same time on the value of the Political Action Committee. Whenever you're doing grassroots, always look to put the PAC plug in. Obviously, make sure that they're members of your association, but there's a lot of opportunities for your grassroots and your advocates to be also donating to the PAC. And they're already engaged in the process. They already understand the process. And you just have to take that extra step to do the PAC pitch. Sometimes people find it awkward to ask for money, but you have to make sure that you train your PAC advocates and your PAC champions to make that extra step and actually ask for the PAC contribution. And this is the definition of a political action committee. I try to make sure that every PAC check that we cut is delivered in person by one of our PAC supporters in the district, which is a great way. So if you combine your grassroots with that, a lot of times you can look and see if any of your grassroots advocates are in the district for a member of Congress who's having an event, and you can ask them to donate to the PAC, and then they can deliver the check. You get a lot more bang for your buck, too, if you attend an event here in Washington, D.C., and then you try to find an advocate in the district to deliver the PAC check. And you actually show the value of the Political Action Committee to your members. I think people need to understand, I have half students in my association, so they have debt, they have loans, but you really have to show that there's a value to them supporting the future of their profession. And they actually get to meet their legislator, too. A lot of times when you do fly-ins, they meet with the staff members. Even if you get them to do a district meeting, they just meet with the staff members, which staff members, as we all know, are very knowledgeable on the issues, but there's something to be said with actually meeting your senator and with your member of Congress. So it's a really great way to get people involved on the ground. And always make sure that you get pictures taken. It's a great way to report back to your membership. It's a great way to just report back to your membership on what your advocates are doing, and make sure that you send this out to your grassroots advocates too. They want to know, they need to see that if they get involved in the PAC, they can make that extra step in their advocacy efforts.
Absolutely. So just a couple questions for you as you are talking us through this. So do you maybe want to give us an example of when during an advocacy campaign you have kind of on your site or in your communications kind of merged grassroots engagement requests or grassroots call to action with, some information about the PAC or even asking for a PAC donation? Do you maybe want to kind of walk us through an example?
Oh, sure. We do that all the time. I just make sure that, so we have, at this association, we have two main bills in Congress that our association made it a priority. It has to do with Medicare reimbursement, but it's the same exact bills in the House and the Senate. And every time that we send out, we have our huge campaign is around it. Every time we send out an action alert, every time that we send out, we do a newsletter on the state of the bills, our co-sponsors. Every time we send that out, I make sure that we do, we split the list, and our IT department sometimes complains about it, but I make sure that they split the list, and the emails that go out to our members always have the PAC plug in it. Even if it's a little update just about what the PAC's doing, there's always the PAC plug in it and a link to our PAC website for them to contribute. So there's always ways to combine what you're doing in an issue advocacy campaign, and just look for those opportunities within your association to put the PAC plug in there.
Makes a lot of sense. Do you all find that, honestly, combining the two is getting you a better contribution to your PAC?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that when your members see the two combined, that there's actually, they see the value of their advocacy efforts, and it really does. They see that they have to be involved in the political and the electoral process. Otherwise, there's only so far you can go with doing your Hill meetings and your fly-ins, and that's where we are personally. This is where we are right now with our campaign, and the PAC is becoming really important for the next step in getting our bills to keep moving in Congress.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. So as you're talking about kind of the events aspect of PAC, naturally, of course, you have your lobby day, you're talking about meeting members of Congress. I imagine that you also have fundraisers. So how do you kind of manage all of the aspects of events along with the grassroots campaigns? Because I imagine in some cases you have some synergy there where you can kind of, either they're the exact same people or you kind of are doing a campaign that would align the two, but I imagine there are also some differences. So maybe talk to us a little bit about what a PAC event looks like versus a grassroots event.
Grassroots events, well, you have your lobby days. You have them in the states. You have them here in D.C. But even when you have them here in D.C., I've had, 300 students that come in to lobby Congress. There's always ways that you can combine the PAC. So we have our students go up to the Hill, and then they meet with their offices, and then we get a member of Congress to come speak to them at our headquarters, which is located on the mall, but we have a member of Congress come speak, and then we urge them to also give to the PAC. And usually the member of Congress, they can't directly solicit for our PAC, but we have the member of Congress really talk about the importance of being involved with political action committees and in the political process. So you also have, they also get the contact with their member of Congress or a member of Congress, and they learn the way that, bills become laws, the political landscape, but they also learn the value from a member of Congress of getting involved with PAC and with grassroots. So it's a nice way to combine the two.
Perfect. That's really great to hear. It's nice to kind of understand as well what the differences look like, especially on the federal versus the state level. I can definitely see how there can be some similarities, but there are also definitely some differences.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so a lot of times, depending on your association, we have pharmacies, or we have a lot of pharmacy schools out in various states and districts. So we have a member of Congress go do a tour of the facilities, and I help set that up. But I also do my best to combine it. That's a perfect example of a grassroots event. But you can also do a PAC event. Just make sure that they're always members of the association. But you can ask a member of Congress to Usually you have to have a PAC contribution to the member of Congress, but you can ask maybe a Grass Tops member who's also a big PAC supporter to do a separate event with the member of Congress after he does or she does the facility tour. And then that Grass Tops person that's hosting that event can invite other grassroots advocates who are members of the association to donate to the PAC and to get involved with the member of Congress and their electoral efforts. And that's a great way to show the value of the Political Action Committee because it looks like an exclusive fundraiser and they actually get to meet personally with the member of Congress. And as I said, that you can have the member of Congress, usually you can talk to the staff when you're setting it up, but ask the staff member to urge the member of Congress to talk about the value of political action committees.
Gotcha. No, that's awesome. I think the exclusivity of it, too, definitely is what would drive people, it sounds like, to kind of understand that what you're doing is special and it's really relevant to them and they can get behind it. So why don't we talk a little bit on the next slide? I know you have some information about issue campaigns. Definitely interested to hear about that.
Right. As I mentioned, with issue campaigns, there's always things going out. Your media department, your PR department is always pushing out news alerts and newsletters. So just always make sure that you have a PAC plug in there because, and I also handle our, we use CQ Roll Call Engage for our action alerts and for other grassroots activities. And we include the link in there for them to send their email to the member of Congress. But if it's going out to just members, you can also put the PAC plug in there. So don't forget about that. And you might get some pushback from the departments about the PAC plug. I certainly do, but it's perfectly legal if it's going out to just members of your association. And you can definitely brand the PAC at this point. You can brand the PAC however you want. So brand the PAC that it's really part of the issue campaign. Maybe come up with a special logo that matches the issue campaign's logo. Usually I know a lot of PACs, our PAC has just the capital as our logo, but maybe change the colors for while you're having this issue campaign to the issue campaign's colors so it blends in a little bit more.
Got it. No, that's a really great idea too. I feel like you know, PAC branding as a whole, you mentioned a little bit about compliance and regulations with PAC. I imagine that there are some restrictions that you've run into in the past where there are some things that you wanted to do that you couldn't do, and you kind of had to learn, you know, over the course of time what you can and what you can't do. Do you have any maybe lessons learned for us in dealing with communications departments about, you know, okay, within the PAC regulatory world, these are the things that you can do and we should be promoting these versus, you know, these are things you can't do? Any kind of tips and tricks on how you kind of manage that communication aspect?
Yeah, you just have to make sure that everybody is really trained on FEC regulations. It's really hard because, especially in the social media world and having half of our membership as students, they get really excited about the PAC, which is great, but at the same time, they want to be posting on Facebook and Twitter to give to our PAC. And I just have to make sure that when you're training them, and I do a lot of these webinars for a membership, you really just kind of have to make sure that they know that they can't be specifically soliciting for the PAC outside of membership. So there's other ways you can get around it. Private groups is great, making sure that there's only members within the private groups. You can do private groups on Facebook or an email list. And we have a separate community on our website that just members can get into. So definitely you can start that conversation about PAC and grassroots within these private groups as well.
Perfect.
And you can FEC regulations. You can talk about your PAC, and you can talk about why PACs are important. You just can't specifically solicit. So always make sure you make that distinction to your membership.
Perfect. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think understanding kind of what you can do with Facebook is really great to hear for me because anything that you can do to kind of manage your social media campaign in a way that's compliant but is going to get the word out there more makes a ton of sense. And I think a lot of our other clients definitely kind of benefit from hearing more on how can I integrate social media with what I'm doing, but do it in a way that's not going to get me in trouble. And so creating something like a private group or a private page, making sure that it's very like distinctly managed, but nonetheless like something that you're able to do is good to hear, and that social media isn't just off limits.
Right. It can still be used. It just has to be used carefully.
Perfect. So why don't we talk a little bit about kind of your experience with fly-ins, and what a great picture.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I do a lot of fly-ins, probably a fly-in almost every month in some sort of aspect. And as I said, we have a member of Congress usually come speak, and usually you do have to give a PAC contribution. We do this usually for the students, but at my last association, when I handled our PAC and grassroots, our board would actually come to DC, and the way that we would do, and a lot of our high-level committees, the way that I did it then was if our leadership, if they gave a certain amount of money to our PAC, they could meet with the member of Congress beforehand for a special happy hour, or afterwards for special drinks, and it just made it a little bit more exclusive for our PAC members who are giving at a higher level of money. So that's a difference that you can make if it's a little fancier of a fly-in. If it's a huge fly-in, you just want to get the member of Congress there and have them speak about the importance of the PAC. And for students especially, I sell a lot of our political action committee swag. We do the pins, the typical PAC merchandise. And if you don't have, we have a really good location. We're on the mall. But if you want to do, if you have the funds, if you have the budget, we're in DC. There's a lot of great places that you could do a special event with a member of Congress after your fly-in, the museum, et cetera. There's a lot of places you can do one. So there's always ways to integrate the PAC into your fly-in.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's really nice to hear kind of that alignment can happen, because I know some of, the aspects of managing your fly-in is everything from making sure that when meetings change, which they will, and they would definitely do, like you have to, kind of make sure those communications are happening, make sure people are trained up on what to talk about when they're having their meetings. Like, there's just so much administrative overhead, and I think it's kind of easy for PAC to get left behind unless you're really pushing for it as an overall strategy. So it's really nice to hear that you are kind of making that effort. And I also like, kind of hearing a little bit about the exclusivity of the events that you're providing, because I think ultimately, even if you have to do a little extra work to make sure that PAC has its place in your fly-in, you're going to benefit from that for years, not only in your contributions, but also, you're making those connections last a little longer by having that happy hour, by taking those pictures, by managing that social media campaign that's actually talking about what your PAC is doing. And so, you're going to reap the rewards of that, because good marketing is good marketing. And if you miss out on that, it's just another level of effort that you're going to have to go to get any contribution. It's good to kind of take that media opportunity, and it's nice to hear that you all are doing that. Why don't we talk a little bit about your kind of leadership slide and understanding kind of how to manage?
Right. So as I mentioned, if you're doing a board meeting in DC or wherever, I know board meetings happen all over the country, really make sure that you're soliciting them. And even with the fly-ins earlier, make sure you have a little card, a pledge card. Business reply envelopes and a permit is the best thing I've ever done. You just stick in the pledge card and the business reply envelope, and you hand them out. These are people who are already engaged in the process. So make sure that you're handing those out during your training. I'm sure that you all train your advocates before you go up there. So make sure that you are handing out pledge cards as well, and putting that PAC plug into all your presentations. And with leadership at board meetings, there's a great time to train your leadership on how to do a PAC push. They know how to do grassroots. Your leadership knows how to do grassroots. They meet with the members of Congress. They have relationships with their members of Congress out in the district here in DC. But as I said, the PAC push, a lot of people who aren't involved in PACs or fundraising, they feel awkward about asking for money, and it's your responsibility to make sure that they don't feel awkward about it. And as I'm sure all the PAC people know, peer-to-peer fundraising is the most effective way. There's only so many times I can ask my membership for money, but it really says a lot when leadership is asking for contribution, and it really does change the culture of your association. having the leadership support the PAC and show that it's important and an integral part of the advocacy, it really does help the PAC grow and your advocacy program grow in general. And provide solicitation materials. I have a fundraising kit, a PAC fundraising kit that I update once a year, twice a year, and it's pretty thorough. There's an example solicitation letter in there, good talking points, a lot of infographics. I'm trying to push my advocacy programs to be more infographic-y as possible. So make sure that's all involved in your solicitation materials and make sure that it's available to them. I'm pushing everything to Dropboxes now so they can check on their own accord, see what's updated. If they're doing that, a lot of times my leadership forgets to tell me that they're doing a presentation on APHA's advocacy initiatives. So they'll all of a sudden ask me for a PowerPoint or my solicitation materials. And when now I have these Dropbox links so they can just check on their own accord before they go do these presentations so they know that they have the materials available for them. And even with your own, my VP and my CEO, they do a lot of presentations around the country. So make sure that your own boss knows how to make the PAC pitch. And make sure that they are actually making the PAC pitch. Sometimes they forget. They have other things on their mind. So make sure that it's always on it's always on their mind that they have to do a PAC pitch.
Got it. So just one question for you in there. When you're kind of talking about creating these solicitation materials, it sounds like the number one thing that you run up against is making sure that you always have the content available for the right person. So I know you mentioned Dropbox. There are, that you could use Google Drive. You could use, any sort of file storage. You could even use the file manager on Engage, to make sure that that happens. But I think that's definitely an important takeaway for the clients who are listening in is, the number one thing about building a content site, the number one thing about building campaigns, the number one thing about managing all of your marketing materials, even if you're not in the communications department, you're not in marketing, is making sure that all of the content is always available and it's up to date and it lives in a certain place that you can manage yourself. And it sounds to me like that's something that you all are doing well. But, it all comes down to a system. And I know, Josh is going to talk about that here a little bit shortly, but I think, this system is more than half the battle. So it's really great to hear you talk about that. And in addition to that, I do have kind of one question for you on how to kind of always have slides ready, because I can imagine that, your leadership are talking in different tones to different people. So kind of how do you break down those slides that you have ready into kind of different categories of what type of person they might be talking to?
Sure. If that information is available to me, who they're talking to, then I can definitely change the wording or have it available for them. For example, if they're giving a presentation to students at a campus, that changes it a little bit because I want to make sure that they know that it's the future of their profession and that they get the other students involved. There's a lot of ways to get involved on campuses. Just wording it for students rather than for older professionals. So I'm a big fan of targeting, message targeting. I try to do it in all my communications to my membership. So I try to do it as much as possible, and I try to have those slides available. But, then they sometimes will give presentations to people who are a state association or one of our state associations, people who definitely know the issues already, and it's a lot more in-depth. But it's making that connection to why Political Action Committee, a lot of times, our members don't really understand or, they don't understand why they have to give money to something. And you really have to make that connection. They're my members are very scientific, very smart. But the scientific part is, 1 + 1 = 2. And as we all know, that's not how the legislative or political process works. It's a very messy process, but you have to be engaged in it. And I really try to help educate our members on why that's important, and you have to educate these people and your leadership or your bosses who are giving these presentations also on why it's important, because if they feel comfortable speaking about it, especially to very successful people in the field, if they feel comfortable talking about it, then they're going to have that connection and help push them into being involved in the process. All right. Thank you, Lauren. So why don't we transition over to Josh now to get some advice on data and all of his good tips from a PAC standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, PAC and grassroots definitely go hand in hand, especially in a well-tuned, well-oiled government relations program. One of the things that can be shared between PAC as well as grassroots departments is data, metrics. Key indicators for both PAC and grassroots are very useful for one another, and engaging somebody in PAC activities as well as grassroots activities, definitely go hand in hand. Additionally, tracking systems, a lot of them are uniform and integrated, where you can house your data in one software system where you can see PAC activity as well as grassroots information. It could also be appended data such as nonprofit giving history or anything along those lines that's useful from the consumer or political side that have been appended. Signal data and L2, just throwing that out there, we did a project with them with the American Diabetes Association where we housed a lot of that political and consumer data right next to our grassroots information. We were a 501c3, so although we did have the information on political giving history, we did not have a political action committee for that organization, but the information itself is very useful to both PAC and grassroots. When I was at the American Motorcyclist Association, I was the PAC administrator as well as the grassroots manager. So sometimes in smaller, nonprofit organizations or trade associations, even that grassroots and PAC function will go hand in hand in one position, as Lauren can attest.
Perfect. So just a question for you on some trends there, because since we're talking about data, were you kind of seeing a one-to-one relationship where people who are more active on a grassroots standpoint, on a grassroots level, are also more active in their giving? Or is it, people who are less active in terms of sending letters to elected officials tend to contribute more? Can you maybe just talk to us about some trends you've experienced?
I mean, this is a trend that everybody in grassroots assumes that, if you take action, you're more likely to write a PAC check and vice versa. This is something that continually comes up in casual conversations with grassroots practitioners. We don't have that set information based on research yet. However, I know that the Grassroots Professional Network, this is the research area that we're going to focus on mostly. There have been previous studies done by organizations out there that make loose connections, but we want that affirmative statement that there is that correlation between the two. And, at this point in time during this particular cycle, can we say that, that holds to be true? Not necessarily. We assume so, and I think everybody from the personal anecdotal standpoint will say yes, but do we have research to back that up right now? No.
Gotcha. I know that's definitely a great bit of information to have. From a CQ standpoint, I think, we would be happy to continue to partner with the Grassroots Professional Network to see what we can do to gather that data over time, because many of our clients, I know, as well as our prospects, are always coming to us and they're saying, it's great that you sell PAC software, it's great that you sell grassroots software, it's great that, we can all have those things working together, but, can you tell me what the benefits are of having all of that in one place? And it's nice to tell them that other than just saying, well, you can have all of your data, we can start to talk about that sort of correlation. So I think that's definitely something.
I think we got the makings of a perfect white paper there.
I think at this rate, according to all of our webinars, if we published a white paper for everyone we did, we would probably be in research for the next 2 years. So
Fantastic. Though, why don't we talk a little bit about your carrot and stick slide here? I'm excited to see what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of government relations, boils down to the carrots and sticks concept. And, I first learned about this as an undergraduate, and it's used a lot of times as an international relations concept. But carrots and sticks can also be applied to domestic politics and the American political system. And I think that PAC and grassroots really embodies carrots and sticks. Grassroots can be both a carrot as well as a stick, in the sense that, you can reward elected officials and praise them publicly for actions that they've taken, or you can chastise them to an extent and say, hey, you need to get active on this. This is an important issue. You're not listening to your constituents. You're not listening to our membership on this issue, and we have a vested stake. This is why it's important. This is why you need to change your position or take action on this. In the PAC sense, it's the basic concept of the competitor and the challenger comes around looking for donations for a campaign to run a formidable race, or the incumbent is looking to retain that. And a PAC check is certainly one of the utmost carrots that an organization can utilize.
Fantastic. I think that's a great explanation to kind of talk about both sides of the elected officials, kind of role in this process. It definitely, I think, will resonate with our listeners, and certainly resonates with me.
So, one of the most crucial things between PAC and grassroots is communication, and constant communication. As I mentioned, there's a lot of tools that are universal that both can use, can have a similar system, can have similar data points that they're looking at. Your PAC can't be going in one direction and your grassroots going in the other, and your grassroots can't be going in one direction and your PAC going in another. It's crucial that you have routine, regular meetings, discuss the different challenges, discuss, how do you optimize engagement. A lot of organizations will have roles and responsibilities for a person in the government relations department called political programs or political engagement. A lot of times that person deals with kind of managing both PAC and grassroots, or facilitating that conversation or communication between both of them. I think it's incredibly valuable if you have a grassroots team and a PAC team that can sit down and say, all right, this is what our priorities are, and this is how we get to those goals in the long run.
Fantastic. I think that definitely speaks to kind of the power of communication, as well as understanding, consistency is required. It can't just be kind of one time. It's got to be all the time.
Absolutely. So another thing is joint recognition of political activism. During your Capitol Hill Day, your lobby day, have an awards ceremony where you recognize the efforts of your advocacy, your grassroots, or your key contact program, as well as your PAC inner circle. In that award ceremony, you might give someone an award for being distinguished in writing to their legislator multiple times and meeting with their member of Congress in district and during the lobby day. And then you also might, give an award to somebody that has been consistently contributing to your PAC and being part of your PAC inner circle. One of the examples of an organization that does this well, of integrating their joint recognition program on political activism, is the National Association of Chain Drugstores. And during their lobby day, they have this joint award ceremony. They release a joint press release, and they recognize both the efforts of their PAC and their grassroots.
Certainly.
So another area where there is, it's very fruitful for collaboration between PAC and grassroots is training, having information in written guides, in-person trainings where, your grassroots manager, your grassroots director presents on a host of ways that people, your members can get involved, or as well as your grass tops can get involved. And a lot of times you need to include that language about PAC and giving. Your PAC manager should be the one really facilitating that language that's physically included in the guide or used in the training, because a lot of times there are specific laws and regulations on the language that you can use, a solicitable class, and it gets very complicated. So definitely, as the grassroots person, I defer to the PAC person on the specifics of that, and in determining what language to use in the guides as well as the in-person training. An election cycle is a perfect time, and I've written on 2 or 3 articles, one for campaigns and elections, one for CQ, on ways you can involve and engage during an election cycle, and how it's a prime time for organizations to really bolster their grassroots and have their membership engaged. That goes hand in hand with having your PAC engaged in the election process as well. Definitely don't take a back seat and allow what's going on in partisan politics to dominate what's going on in the trade association and the membership association, or as well as the corporate grassroots. You can be very active and involved in both PAC and grassroots, and the election cycle is prime time to do that. We talked about it before. Your top PAC donors a lot of times are your grass tops or your grassroots ambassadors. They can be that. And it shows that they're already interested in the organization. They're willing to give money. Giving money for me is at the top of the engagement ladder. If someone's going to write $1,000 check to your organization, they're vested in your cause and they're interested in it, and chances are they know their issues, because they wouldn't give that $1,000 if they didn't understand what was going on and what your organization represented. So they make for great grass tops or grassroots ambassadors.
Fantastic. So maybe just kind of staying on that topic for a second, what would you recommend, kind of from the ambassador standpoint, as someone who's kind of a new ambassador getting ready to maybe become that person for the first time? They've donated money for a couple of years. They've been fairly active on a grassroots level, and you want to reach out to them and say, hey, would you be willing to be an ambassador for an organization? You clearly, you've been involved. You want to continue to be involved. Here are some things that I'd like you to do. Maybe talk to me a little bit around kind of what that role looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Roles vary organization to organization. Some of the larger trade associations will pay for their grass tops or grassroots ambassadors to come to D.C. for a lobby day. They'll provide regional trainings. They'll provide continuing resources. The Grass Tops at the Diabetes Association had a monthly webinar series just to keep them active, an hour-and-a-half webinar, and it was for the most engaged folks of the grassroots department. And I think that it varies organization to organization, but the common theme there is providing the information in a processable way. If you're going to ask somebody if they're ready to take the next step and go beyond giving a check to become an ambassador, provide a bulleted list, a clear set of expectations. Some organizations will provide a job description, and they'll say, this is what you need to do, and this is the expectations that you have for this year as an ambassador. So from the beginning, if the relationship is established and it's clear what the expectations are, I think that your ambassador, your Grass Tops program will be a lot better, for years to come. But don't assume that they have all the information and know the issues. Provide those vehicles for training, and then also encourage the new ambassadors to sit down with past ambassadors or past grassroots top activists. If you can pair your grassroots activists for their first meeting with someone that's a seasoned person that has gone to 10 congressional meetings, that's always great. if for anything, just comforting for that new ambassador to say, all right, this is how a congressional meeting goes. It's really only 15 minutes long. It's not that difficult. The elected official works for me in a sense, and there's nothing to really be intimidated about.
Gotcha. No, those are all really great tips. And I think kind of coming back to your very initial point around, as a PAC administrator, there's some things with the data that you're able to do, but at the same time, you're not able to kind of give the legal language of how to interact with the PAC and everything like that, because that really is a specialty. But there are some tips that you can give to your ambassadors just with your experience in grassroots. And so for any of our listeners on the line kind of wondering what things they can pull from Josh's advice versus what things they should talk to their PAC person about, I think all of these tips around the ambassador definitely are a great place to start, especially if you haven't had a PAC ambassador before or thought about building this sort of program. Reaching out to those top grassroots activists is a great place to start with seeing what kind of ambassador program might work for your organization, and they're certainly not all going to be the same. So these are all really great points, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the moral of the story there is if you have specific PAC questions, definitely tweet at Lauren and do not tweet me, because I will not give the correct answer or will be able to give the right information.
Certainly. I know it's kind of a struggle that CQ has, and I'm sure many other software providers of, kind of PAC solutions. There are certain things that we can say to show you how to set your systems up, but there are also some things that we can't say just because of the kind of legal implications. So it's a little bit of a sticky area, and I think Lauren will do a great job kind of navigating that for our listeners, so certainly reach out to her. Let's talk a little bit about email.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, in the email space, there's definitely room for grassroots messaging. In the PAC solicitation, having that PS line that says, have you seen our most recent action alert? This is a big issue for us. Please, continue your support by taking action. The ladders of engagement, I use that analogy a lot of times, and it's really going up and down that ladder. So, as I said, giving a PAC check and giving money to an organization is definitely one of the top of the ladder for that. So if you can get somebody to take an email action alert or tweet an elected official, that should be a lot easier of an ask. It's just really coordinating with your PAC folks to ensure that that language and that messaging is included in those emails. You can have PAC language in some of your grassroots appeals, but really that has to be segmented and, again, follow strict guidelines that are laid out by, your PAC manager, but sometimes even having counsel look at that as well. You just want to make sure that everything's compliant and you're not overstepping your bounds with any FEC issues. But I encourage, when you can and when you do it correctly, pulling in all the different stakeholders to have interchangeable messaging, so that PS line or a little snippet in your PAC message also appears in your grassroots message and vice versa.
Fantastic. Now, this is definitely great to make sure that, you're kind of playing off of each program, and that way the advocate is getting the same experience every time you're hearing from maybe your PAC coordinator as well as your grassroots coordinator, if those are different people. So definitely important for the advocate to have, kind of a streamlined experience. Let's talk about some additional resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, there's a few great free resources out there. We always talk in a lot of our webinars about the PAC resources from the Showalter Group, as well as the CQ Connectivity blog. The Grassroots Professional Network, we do a lot with everything on advocacy communication and grassroots, which does encompass some components of PAC. We have a large presence in the people that attend our events from PAC facets. So I really encourage people to look at those resources. There are a few paid resources out there, NABPAC being one of them, the Public Affairs Council being another. They have a lot of information and a lot of different programs on these. Beekeeper Group also does the Advocacy Leaders Network alongside some other folks, the Congressional Management Foundation, and they provide some additional PAC information as well as grassroots. And, you know, the topic of coordinating PAC and grassroots is something that has been talked about quite a bit in recent years as grassroots has taken a larger role in an overall government relations program. So I would anticipate to see more resources coming out on the lines of this topic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this. And we'll certainly send these resources around to our listeners afterwards so they can, you know, kind of click through and see what would be helpful to them. So for any other questions, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at #SpeakUAdvocacy, and we'll be happy to get back to you. I think as Josh mentioned, for any major questions on the PAC front, certainly we'll be happy to answer those. And for any other grassroots types of questions, Josh will be certainly able to answer those. So thank you again, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you.